Hey, I'm Craig Bida from Cone Communications. If you're not familiar, we are an agency that has focused for the last 30 years on cause and social impact, really at the nexus of business, driving business and social impact all in one package. And if you were at the event last night when you heard Sir Martin talking about the importance of business and the integration, and that doing good and being in business, if you're in it for the long haul, are inextricably linked today, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, is the important role that CSR is increasingly playing on a global platform and around the world. The thing that I wanted to talk about very briefly before we jump in is it's important to recognize that we are in the midst of a global crisis right now. If you haven't been following the papers around the Philippines and the issues that are out there, that this is one of these moments in time when companies are coming together around the world to join together and help individuals in need. And some of our panelists, their companies are actually involved. And so we just call that out to say it's indicative of some of the challenges that companies are facing increasingly today when disasters and crises crop up in addition to the work that they're doing on an ongoing basis. This is as well a global conference, and so we are going to take a global perspective, and we're going to talk about not just the complexities of CSR, which are hard on any given day in any given geography, but when you think about managing across global scale and a global level, it makes it even harder and more challenging, and that's what we're going to be digging into as we jump into the discussion. So with that, with no further ado, I'll ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and they'll get right into the mix.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sherinian. I'm with the United Nations Foundation, and our mission is to create campaigns and initiatives around global issues so that we can, aligning with UN causes, work with major corporations and organizations around the world in an effort to help bring them around the table. That's on issues like women and girls, energy and climate, the environment, and global health. So our job is to create the momentum around which companies can help articulate and tell their CSR story. Before coming to UN Foundation, in the brief spirit of the introduction, I was a diplomat for over a decade, and I've been working in the nexus of communications and global issues ever since.
Hey, and I'm Cindy Connor. I'm Director of Citizenship and Reputation Management at FedEx. And our job is to connect people and possibilities around the world, and we do that not only through our transportation services, but also through our global CSR programs and our outreach to communities far and wide.
I'm Vincent Stanley. I'm current title is Chief Storyteller at Patagonia, which is not really a title, but the role I've played. I was one of the company's original employees in 1973, and I recently, or last year, wrote a book with the company's founder, Yvon Chouinard, called The Responsible Company, which traces our growing commitment to social and environmental responsibility over that 40-year period. When we started, we didn't have a clue. Nobody talked about it. And what we've observed is, as we have moved along in that time, we watched a business follow suit.
Terrific. You'll hear more from each of these individuals and the experiences that they've had in the journey they're on. Our goal today is to have you leave with some ideas and thoughts and some really applied ideas that you can take into your business, into your client interactions as we think about CSR from a global platform. I'm going to share a few slides to set the base, to really give you a sense of the pressure that these companies are feeling from consumers, and also a sense of how consumers are asking for companies to interact with them. This slide shows a story that is really about an enormous amount of pressure that is on the shoulders of the folks on this stage. And it looks at the expectations of consumers for companies. And you start at the upper right, 12 o'clock. There are only 6% of consumers who say companies just exist to make money and just exist to sell widgets. Everybody else, as you come around the circle, increasing level of expectation, whether it's from donating dollars, time, energy, resources, to being an activist on social issues and transforming the business practices. And so this is global research, and it tells a story of dramatic expectations that consumers have on companies. When consumers feel that companies are doing the right thing, when they are engaging, there is a huge opportunity for affinity and loyalty. You see data on the slide which talks about a more positive image, an increased likelihood for trust, and more loyalty potentially for companies. It's not as easy as you might think, though. Now we'll get into some of the complexities. And here are the expectations of global consumers in terms of how companies should act. And you look at the percentage of people that want CSR to be something that happens in my community, in my neighborhood, something that's going to impact my family versus my country and then the rest of the world. And so companies that are existing on a global level have to find ways to engage down at the local level and have local impact. There are also things to decipher in the CSR world. Those of you with clients or that are running businesses that have global operations understand this intuitively, that a product that you create for Omaha might not work on the other side of the world. Well, the same concept applies to CSR, and there are nuances that our panelists will dig into in terms of expectations, even attitudes towards CSR as an entire idea differs widely across geographies. And then the last point is really around this fundamental skepticism, and we've heard it referenced throughout the day yesterday and parts of today, is that consumers aren't necessarily buying it, that despite all the pressure, despite all the work, despite all the activities, as you look across the spectrum on the bottom here, globally it rolls to about only 22% think that these companies, with all the efforts that they're making, are actually having an impact on issues. And so that leads to a challenge, which says you have at the one end a global scale, and how do you drive efficiency that comes from running a global operation versus driving local? And then how do you think about the right issues and how to solve them? Are you going to focus on one thing, or are you going to focus across a multiplicity of issues, remembering that people want you to show up in their community, in their backyard, and drive impact? So with that as a starting point, I'd love to get a sense from the panelists how you feel when you see that stuff. Does that reflect your life, the pressure, the complexity, the expectations that are on your shoulders? Anyone want to jump in? Who wants to start? Cindy, you're smiling.
Well, because yes is the answer. As a global company, FedEx realizes that we have a responsibility to all of our 300,000 team members and our customers around the world, and in the over 200 locations that we serve, 200 countries that we serve, rather. But we also realize at the same time that to be effective, it's the old, think globally, act locally. So what we have to do is, and what we have done, is develop sort of our global pillars, the things that FedEx is uniquely qualified to do well, that make sense with our business and our core competencies, but then also look at local opportunities. So it's almost this constant balancing act to keep that everything in in tandem operating the way it needs to, because people look at what you do as individuals. A lot of times we'll talk about groups, but really it's how does it impact me? How does it impact my world and my life? And if we're doing something good, far away, it's like, that's fine, but, the old adage of, what have you done for me lately?
Vincent, how about in your experience on that global level with those expectations?
I think the expectations about Patagonia have gotten higher since we've had very good press for the last 6 years, and because we've consistently made an argument over the past 30 years for increased social and environmental responsibility. How that translates locally is interesting to me, because I don't think there is much local variance. I mean, I think there's a difference in attitudes. I was just in Korea and I was in Japan earlier this summer, and what I see is the same kinds of tensions around these issues all around the world. A kind of a disappearance of any kind of expectation that corporations or governments will behave well, and at the same time a kind of yearning to create better behavior and also to have more opportunities to behave more socially and environmentally responsible, but kind of lacking in overall context. So it's very complicated. It benefits us because people have a good feeling about the company, but I don't know how deep or how strong the knowledge is underneath that, or whether it could turn around.
Aaron, how about you? You're someone who sits in a global organization that has tentacles and impact everywhere. What's your view on
I do, and I love the question, because my job is to sit somewhere between a corporate boardroom and with a lot of agencies that do a lot of this work. So that question fascinates me, and I'm in the spirit of being provocative and hopefully blowing up the Twitter stream at some point, right? I want to show, can we go back to the bicycle wheel for a minute, Craig? Because I thought you and Cone have done here is fascinating, but keep going back for a minute. What makes me mad and what makes me worried is right here, the space somewhere between that red and the gray, between the 31 and the 29%. This is where I see the tension living right now. We're well past do no harm. This is about do more good in terms of consumer expectations. So the people that we talk to, whether they're our activists or our consumers, the do no harm thing is done. And I think that that space right there means that the expectation for any organization of size, and I'm with two, with girth and with good in their names, right? Patagonia and FedEx are great examples. But what we see when we talk to people, whether they be large institutions, consumer groups, are campaigns and initiatives, which are everyone from mom bloggers to teens to philanthropists. It's about now having to be, granted, a fundraiser, giving out money in a smart way, a friend-raiser, building all that awareness, but more importantly, it's a hellraiser. I think people are looking at companies to take a stand on an issue. So you can't just be one of the three. You've got to be fundraiser, friend-raiser, hellraiser these days. And I think that place, somewhere between that 31 and that 29%, has got to be, it's growing, and I just think we have to figure out ways to articulate it better with consumers and with the organizations we partner with.
So great question. Cindy, please jump.
And I was gonna say, and I think it's particularly hard because as we all know, people's expectations of companies are higher than ever, but at the same time, there's a lot of skepticism about companies, and they tend to look at the things we do, I think, with much more questioningly and harder than they did, 30 or 40 years ago. When I was a kid, my mom worked for GM, and sort of the mantra was, as goes GM, so goes the world. Companies were seen as these great sort of shining stars, and some of that has gone away. And with social media too, there's this sort of immediacy. There's a lot of information. So we're in a situation where people want more, but they're really not certain that we can deliver it.
Yeah, so a tough spot to be in. A question, if we are past this era of not past do no harm, and you've talked about how your success has actually increased the intensity of scrutiny and the expectations. How much is enough? How do you know how much to invest? How do you focus on issues? The world is wide. The issues are so many. You operate in a global level where people have these expectations. How do you approach figuring out what to do and doing it in a way that's not a mile wide or an inch wide around the planet, but have no depth?
I think it's a difficult position because you have, if not doing harm is not enough and you have to prove that you do good, we're all doing a lot of harm as businesses. We're all doing a tremendous amount of environmental harm just to stay in business. We use fossil fuels. We use industrial systems that were developed before this crisis became apparent, and they haven't changed. So one of the things that interests me is that some companies are greenwashing, but there are other companies who are doing great things who won't talk about it because they're afraid of being removed from a pedestal. They're afraid of being seen as bad on some other front. One of my favorite examples is that Dunkin' Donuts uses fair trade coffee, but won't talk about it because they fear they'll alienate their customers who, on trans fat or some other kind of issue. So what companies have to do, I think, there was a discussion in the previous panel of kind of painting the picture or telling the story of what we're doing that's actually helpful to people, that engages them. I think that we need to do that. All companies need to do a better job of showing the customer a picture of how life will be better when a certain change is made. And at the same time, we have to provide a lot of information on our own practices to raise the kind of knowledge and awareness consumers need to really consider to make intelligent decisions. So it's emotional analogical, I think.
But I think, too, part of what we're able to do, you mentioned fossil fuels. Obviously, FedEx uses fossil fuels. But our chairman is really involved in alternative fuel solutions. We do a lot with electrification. And what we're saying is, what we're doing with electrification of our vehicles, if I could say it, we share. In other words, we think there should be more charging stations. That's not just going to help us, it's going to help everyone. A lot of the research that we do around alternative aviation fuels, we share with the larger community. I mean, we want the world to be better. We realize we use these, we have to use them, but we're actively looking for alternatives and solutions, and we freely share them because it really does help everyone.
Let's go back to your point around telling your story and how you focus efforts against that. And I'd love to get each of your perspectives on this. CSR does create a window into your company, and it can be good and bad. And we hear a lot about authenticity and storytelling and being transparent and being genuine. There are many things, like you're suggesting, that actually are about consumption and using. And how do you manage that portal that's now open through the side of your company where people can see the good, the bad, the ugly? How do you handle that balance between sharing what you're doing, your accomplishments? Well, give us a sense of what that feels like to try to manage that dial at the right level.
We about 5 years ago, we set up something called the Footprint Chronicles, which traces the origins of our products from the mine or the oil well or the farm all the way to our warehouse shelves, and talks about the energy use, waste generated, greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. And the thing that actually customers respond to most is something we do on a number of products, which is very hard to maintain. It's called the good, the bad, and what we think. And I think this is the kind of effort companies should be making. I think more people should know what FedEx is doing to pursue alternative fuels or to increase its resource efficiency. But I think you have to talk about both. You also have to talk about the bad things you do, or people don't find it credible. They just think you're picking an example. So they have to have a sense that they're getting the whole story.
Aaron, how about you from your perspective?
From what I've seen, and I'm going to name some names, if that's okay. But I have not seen the annual reports of my colleagues on the panel, so this is not directed at anyone who's here. I think in terms of the storytelling, we're entering into an era, especially what we just heard about millennials and everything we know about millennials, is that if your annual report has got a chapter on sustainability, you've got a problem. It should not be chapter 10. It's got to be chapters 1 through 10 where you've got a problem in the storytelling. And we know that, and that's how a number of people react. For me, the answer to this question and the previous one, Craig, is really, I think it's a matter of asking your customers, who is your community, what do you think we do best? Where can we make the biggest impact? We can't do everything all across the board, to your point. We can't do it inch deep around the world. What do you think we do best? And then let us tell you where we actually have the ability to move the needle on something. FedEx as a leader in its space. I mean, companies around the world who do this. The example I want to raise is a company that we work with on our Shot at Life campaign is Walgreens. Walgreens knows that it is a point of interaction with millions of people around the world around their health. They realize they do that very well, they tell the story very well, and they decided that's what we're going to do. We could do a lot of things in the world to move the needle on the environment and health, et cetera, but the thing we do really well is this, so that we're going to tell the story about it, we're going to make it a part of everything that we do, and I think that's been a good move for them. I can name, and I will name after this if anyone is interested, a couple of companies that I think are telling that story by not being defensive all the time, but just being very transparent about, this is what I do. We're all going to Thanksgiving. I've got an aunt who makes great mashed potatoes. I hope she never makes a pumpkin pie. And I think it's that same analogy. Just do what you do well and bring that to the table and tell that story a lot.
Go ahead, Cindy.
And I think one of the ways we're handling this is we have stopped looking at CSR as this sort of thing that sort of sits over on the shelf on a corner. Several years ago when we did one of our realignments, we brought together reputation and management and citizenship. This is our thought leadership program. It's our executive support. It's the FedEx culture enterprise-wide. So it's really doing the right thing and being a good corporate citizen. We want to be employer of choice, and we want to be the shipping provider of choice. It's all about who we are. So we try not to just say, here are these, this is what we do in citizenship, this is our reputation, this is thought leadership. It's really, you bring it together and you've got a much stronger story to tell, and you weave the disparate parts in everything you do.
Vincent, your company has been one of the companies that has blazed a trail in that way as well, that integration theme, which is so important. How has it been hard? Have you struggled within that castle that I think many of us think of Patagonia on a hill, having all this incredible, doing all this amazing magical stuff all the time? Is it hard for you as well?
Oh, yeah. Everything has been a struggle at Patagonia. So I think we went through one argument recently, and somebody came up with the phrase "Patagonia arguing about shit for 40 years," and I think
we
that
borrow that one?
yeah, particularly in the area of social responsibility, which is not something we were originally drawn to. We were climbers and surfers, so we were drawn to environmental change and awareness very early on. But it took us a long time to lift the curtain behind the supply chain and look at what we were doing in apparel. And it's very critical, as per the title of this conversation, what we found is to really drive that concern deep into the business. You can't have just two social responsibility people running around the company trying to get everybody to do the stuff. It has to be incorporated into everyone's goals. For instance, we now have our social responsibility people can veto going into a factory that our sourcing people choose if they think we need to make some changes before we should be in that factory. So that's critical.
For those of you with clients or who've run factory and supply chains, you know that's a fairly provocative and empowering choice to give that veto power to those individuals. And that's one of the themes I think that we will see increasingly over time is the need to drive integration and actually back it up. So it's not just a toothless counsel or someone talking, that you're actually backing it up through business decisions. So really terrific. A question for the two of you together, which is your American-born companies, each with a unique history from a unique region and a unique part of the company, and you are now, on any given second, operating around the world, doing all kinds of things in all different geographies. Could you talk about the notion of growing up with a certain set of values and call it projecting them and bringing them forward from both a brand perspective, but also specifically from the CSR perspective? I know, Cindy, for example, your company is called on to be in disasters, and you're at the front lines of those issues all the time. That might be something for you to jump into. But tell us what that's been like.
It's, as my friend over here is saying, it's all a challenge. FedEx has been, was established 40 years ago, maybe the same year Patagonia, 1973. So we just celebrated our 40th anniversary, and when we were talking about it, we really struggled with how we recognize it in a way that resonates with everyone, because we're made up of several different operating companies. We're around the world, we're in all regions. So the companies are different ages. The brand is at a different spot in those places. So we decided to do our anniversary around 40 years of delivering the future. So that's kind of where we try to look at our CSR programs, is very forward-footed. But we have to keep in mind that the FedEx brand in Asia isn't the same as the FedEx brand as far as the regard and where it ranks in the shipper of choice in Asia or Europe as it is in the United States. We're very well known in the United States. We're not as well known in other areas. We've been serving Africa for a number of years with global service partners. We're about to start having our own operations in Africa. So we're looking at how do we introduce ourselves in a different way into this country. We've bought a company there. We're looking at the areas they've supported. What we'll do there will be very different than what we do in the United States. At the same time, it will still use those global pillars that we have. So we, again, as I said earlier, we really try and think globally and act locally. But it sort of sometimes creates kind of a two-tiered system. But I think you have to have your unique local opportunities that resonate with the people there, and then also your global strategic approach that is really deeply ingrained with what your company does and what we're uniquely able to contribute.
I think we're actually pretty similar. We're really a California-based company with those kinds of attitude and that kind of business culture. It's very important when we work around the world to work with strong local partners to whom the brand appeals and to which they're quite responsive, but they also inflect it locally. That's easier to do in Japan than it is to do in Europe, because in Europe you're not dealing with Europe, you're dealing with the 38 different countries that all have very different cultural issues, as you had on that slide about the local response to CSR.
Perhaps one more question, then we'll open up to some questions from the audience and then bring it back to the panel. But Aaron, I wanted to talk to you. I know that you are really interested in a lot of the work that you do is about what I'm going to call CSR now, which is like how to engage people in real time. And I know you've used the word, as we've talked about the panel, these surges that are really interesting to you. And so companies have to have an ongoing plan and they have to be reliable and dependable. But it seems like the work you're doing is about creating these moments in time. Could you talk about the importance of that and what others can learn from that intensity of
Absolutely.
exercise?
And I think it's not a trend of the moment. I think it's the way moving forward. And so let's dispel some myths in here also, since it's a global PR summit, because that whole act locally concept, I wrestle with it all the time. And I don't think it's think globally, act locally anymore. I really think where we're seeing a moment is, especially with the new generation that's very good at saying what they want, they're saying globally activate me locally. That's totally different. It's not a binary trade-off anymore. Globally activate me at a local level. Show me how my thing, whatever you're doing, whether it's a local charity, whether it's part of what your business delivery is. Let's see the connection between that and a global issue. That's what I'm seeing. And the need for these surge moments, as you put, Craig, is that I think that all of you in your boardrooms and those of you who represent agencies, I think you need increasingly a couple of good excuses to surge. You've got to have this long-term plan that will show results and ROI over the course of 2 or 3 years. But at the UN Foundation, we believe in creating a couple of moments where you can come to the table, and at the same time, it's a comparative advantage for you because it's going to be noticed when your competitors aren't there. So the case in point I will use, and I will pitch. I wouldn't be a good comms person if I didn't take the moment to pitch. But we are preparing for, in the next couple of weeks, something we call Giving Tuesday. We've got Black Friday, we've got Cyber Monday, 2 great days to get deals. Why isn't there a day to give back and do something for charity and for social good? We found that these days, whether they're an international day to have either a momentum on social media or a day for people to articulate what they're doing for CSR, are helpful because it's not crowdsourcing, it's not asking the crowd what they think, it's a little bit of crowd pushing. It's giving companies to say, I'm on the right-hand side of this problem or I'm on the wrong side of the problem. So we believe that surge moments around global issues are increasingly important. We just saw it around, if you were following what happened with Malala, the young girl of great courage who was shot because she wanted to go to school. Companies at that point were really good about articulating what their stance was on women and girls. It gave them an opportunity to do it. So I think you need organizations increasingly, like ours, others who are trying to collaborate on global issues, so that you've got a reason to re-articulate your CSR strategy, not because you're being braggy, not because you're being arrogant, but because you owe that in this era of transparency. So watch the surges. I think that's where we're going to be going moving forward.
Make that real for us. Is it easy for you to call up your marketing department and say, hey, take all that advertising off the air about X and direct it to this issue because this is important? Or is it possible? How would you react to that challenge of saying, be now, be big, surges?
No, it's not easy. I'm like, are you kidding? Yeah. What did you have for breakfast this morning? No, I totally agree. I think we're in a shift now as to how they expect you to run your programs. I was at the Global Poverty Concert in New York last month, and I was really struck with the energy and the sort of the power from that event. That's not the kind of thing we typically sponsor, but we have to find some way to kind of balance that, I think, with the support we do that's not quite as exciting for some of the large organizations such as Red Cross. And that's how we're handling our Philippines disaster relief right now. We're working with Direct Relief. We're working with Red Cross. We're working with groups that really know how to handle these type of disasters. So I think you need that kind of excitement, but then there's a lot of work that we do that's not quite as exciting and is emotionally driven.
Maybe, Vincent, you could talk briefly about the work you're doing now around consumption. And you've, in your own way, have created, if not a surge, I call it a firestorm of response, some positive, some negative, from others that have been impacted by your campaign. Just give us a little sense of what you're trying to do in that spirit with that program and that campaign.
Well, we took out an ad in the New York Times 2 years ago called "Don't Buy This Jacket," which basically called attention. We featured a jacket that's one of our most environmentally benign products, and we said, in spite of that, we talked about what the environmental costs are. We asked consumers to buy thoughtfully, that anything that's made has a deep environmental impact. So we've taken that argument, and we're now conducting a campaign called the Responsible Economy. And what we want to do is to point out in our catalogs and in our stores examples of what we think are environmental and social improvements on two different kinds of scale. One is the industrial scale, where we live and where FedEx lives, where you're really going for improvements in resource efficiency, and we're arguing reductions in consumption. And then the second is this whole rise of localism, with farm-to-table craft brewers, which we see as kind of a positive sign in citizenship, and also creating a space in an economy that's beginning to disappear from the big companies that are not generating the kinds of jobs they did. So that's basically what we're working on now. We're free, because of our image, we are actually free to be disruptive from time to time in a way that generally does not harm us with our customer. So
we've heard from clients both sides. I'd like something as disruptive and provocative as that. Others saying, how on earth could they have done that? Because are they playing in a different set of rules? Does gravity not impact them? But you're right, you have permission to do that. Any questions or reflections from the audience? Please, I think we need to wait for a mic. There's a mic runner coming, or you can yell at the top of your lungs.
I think I'm quite close.
Yes, why don't you just...
Do you have any guidelines on how much you should invest in a specific, in an issue in a specific country? So you're very US focused the way you're speaking now. I represent some US companies where I have to advise them sometimes on CSR in North Africa, Morocco, Libya, where I worry sometimes that if the client, if I advise them to invest too much in a project, that they'll then own quite a bad situation or a negative situation in that country. So I think your advice on, how do you know how much to invest in it so you don't have to own it for the rest of your life?
we're a relatively small company. We do about $600 million a year in sales. So our international operations concentrate mostly on marketing and sales. So I don't have the expertise to answer your question.
And I don't have, I'm sorry, I don't have a formula to share with you. We have goals for our overall corporate giving is a percentage of profits. And the way we divvy it up in the regions, it's more art than science. A lot of it has to do with the number of employees and facilities, and if there are issues in those particular markets. If we feel like they need the local money a bit more than some other areas. Some of the programs as an example, we're involved with Safe Kids Worldwide. So there is that sort of umbrella support, and we do Safe Kids activities all over the world. But some of the regions have a little extra money for Safe Kids because they found that that's a very effective program in their region. So I don't have a pat answer for you. I will, to your point of sort of owning something. I think that's a real challenge because, once you contribute or start supporting a nonprofit, there is kind of the expectation it will go on forever, and you can't just cut it off if you need to sunset them or if it's no longer relevant to what you're doing. So you really do have to have a long-range plan, and I think when you go into an area or you support a particular organization, I won't say you need an exit strategy going in, but I think you really need to know on the front end, is this going to go over a long period of time? Excuse me, how do I not create expectations that I'm not going to be able to live up to?
Craig, I don't have the expertise to answer your question, but I'm going to answer it anyway because I think Cindy just gave us the right thing to hone in on. there are so many companies that we work with that will come and they'll say, we don't want to be left holding the ball when there's a real problem. We're just trying to do some good, but it's important for our license to operate in this country that we are working on this particular issue. Why don't you stand with the other companies that are doing it? In this day and age, there are multiple alliances of companies that are working in every country in the world. I don't care what you're working on. The environment, sustainable energy, women and girls, education, children's health. So there are multiple mechanisms out there where I'm not saying it mitigates the risk, but it allows you to do what you're going to do, make the investments that you're going to make, and stand with other companies in doing these alliances. So there's a whole list of that, and any firm worth its salt, I think, and all of you in this room, if you're the firms, are worth your salt, should be designing a program of investment in a country that, by the way, is buttressed by a global thing that makes your CEO look very good, but that tells your story that you're part of a bigger thing than just a check-writing campaign.
And I would add to that that a critical frame, as we see it, is that thinking about impact and the outcomes that you're trying to get, necessarily versus the investment. And that allows you to structure relationships, to rely on the nonprofit partners, and to agree on goals, because you know when to declare victory. You know that you've achieved the specific things you're trying to get to. And so that might be a frame using partner knowledge and expertise and driving towards specific outcomes and really in return on your investment versus just how much money do I throw at the issue. But it is a really relevant question. As you can see, it's thought-provoking even for folks that have been doing this for decades to figure out how do you do that and how do you do both impact as well as deliver and being able to exit. But please.
I think you made a really strong point of working with partners. And the other thing we do is all of our giving is done through specific grants. So that gives us, we give grants for a specific purpose. So we don't have obligation to give to the same groups year after year.
And tied to very specific outcomes and part of the grant-making process. It looks like Paul Holmes has got the mic.
Somebody gave me the mic. Always a mistake.
How did that happen?
No. I assume we all in this room believe, and Martin Saul touched on this last night, that if you're in business for the long term, an investment in social responsibility is precisely that, an investment in that it has benefit to the organization. Given that that's the case, can we and should we be looking for business metrics that show the success of corporate responsibility initiatives, and do those metrics currently exist?
Yeah, I would love if folks have specific things that they're doing within their companies. I think that increasingly there is this pressure to measure and this pressure to provide metrics. And from our perspective, when we engage on an exercise like this, a critical part of the upfront is to set those metrics. And those are both business. They could be related to brand, driving equity, driving specific trial, repeat loyalty, whatever they are, as well as what are the social impact metrics as well, so that you know when you've achieved it. And I think that they're not necessarily standards. I think what you'll hear from folks is that things are so unique to their businesses that it's really about defining what's relevant for you.
Just for some context, we see a lot of award entries that are built around social responsibility, and many of them have, we educated so many people about the issue of malaria, or we raised so much money for a charity as a result. And I obviously one applauds that, but I would always like to see some evidence that in doing that, you actually built relationships, made people more likely to advocate on behalf of your company in the marketplace. Something like Net Promoter Score is an interesting area to explore here, and I'm just curious what people are doing, or whether there's a company like Patagonia, for example, which from the outside certainly appears to believe in CSR almost for its own sake, whether there's almost a hostility to putting some sort of business metric at the end of it because that makes it less pure or more a commercial objective.
It depends on the objective. Environmental is very easy because you take baseline measurements, and usually environmental improvements save you money. When you're talking about our social responsibility department, I think they have loose metrics about certain kinds of improvements they want to make. I think it gets harder when you're talking about campaigns, and you say, okay, this campaign will be successful if we do X. And those kinds of goals tend to be fairly arbitrary and anecdotal. At least they have been at Patagonia.
I think some of it, I think the way you're set up depends on the age of the company. When FedEx started 40 years ago, I think it's been in our DNA, it's part of our culture to do good, to do the right thing. But for so long, that was here, we're doing good here, we're running a business here. So we had these two parallel tracks. And the interesting thing about it is when you're in a logistics company, we have a lot of engineers. These people are very, they're very numbers driven. They're very logical and rational. And we were sort of running our CSR area not like they were running the business. Now, over the years, I think these two tracks have started to, I won't say collide, we'll say combine, but to come closer together. And we really do look at what we're doing in CSR as a business initiative because part of the company's business is being a good corporate citizen, but we also try to talk about it in business terms. And I think that's where you get, using your unique abilities to help an organization. For instance, in Mexico City, we work with Embark to improve traffic patterns in logistics. This really helps Mexico City. It also really helps FedEx because we've got those drivers every day who are trying to go on those same streets. So it's becoming more of a marriage, I think, of the business and the citizenship area. I think it really has to get the kind of support that you need, and then also to get the credibility in the community and to keep it alive as an ongoing effort.
Terrific. We're running short on time, but I will prevail and we'll be available, I think, for a few minutes for heading into lunch, so we'll be around if there's specific questions. But I thought as we closed out, it would be helpful if each of you could share where you think the space is going. Where is CSR headed? What, from the long run up that you've had and the experiences you've had across multiple organizations, give us a sense of how the field is headed, briefly if you could, so folks can get out to lunch. But where's it going, and what do people need to be thinking about as they think about the future as it comes to corporate responsibility in companies? Aaron, why don't you start?
Sure. In the spirit of lunch. For us, we're seeing increasingly, and I'll tell you the story of a boardroom where I was in Illinois a couple of weeks ago where the CEO stood up and said, "You're right, it's just not frosting, it's the cake." And CSR cannot be treated as an extra or an addendum, or the next generation of consumers will not applaud you and reward you at the cash register. They will take you down in their Facebook feed. It is not frosting, it is cake. And the goals, don't overcomplicate them. The world has a set of global goals. You want ROI on your CSR investment? Link yourself to whether or not we're going to get to those 8, today called Millennium Development Goals or whatever they're going to be. That's a business strategy with ROI for you. And then you can feel yourself running through the finish line and feel what it's like when that ribbon is the ribbon that your organization is running through.
Cindy, how about you?
I think it's moved far beyond sort of the check writing discipline that it was for a long time in many companies. We've got to find a way to combine the needs, again, of these large traditional organizations that do so much good, but that aren't as sort of fun and sexy as the crowdsourcing, the quick Kickstarters, the quick direct conversation with the people who are driving the change. So I see us becoming much more nimble, becoming much more focused on particular issues. For a long time, I think in CSR we could solve all the world's problems. Each company has unique abilities, and we really need to focus on those and gather around them.
I see a couple of things. One is what Cindy talked about. The more that CSR becomes engaged with the business as a whole, the more people on the operational side of the business engage with and make those CSR goals their own. Success builds, we learn from our failures, but successes build confidence. And the second thing I think that's really major for Patagonia and for other companies is for companies to work together certainly to reduce their environmental harm and to improve their practices. We helped create something called the Sustainable Apparel Coalition that now has over about 40% of all of the footwear and apparel made in the world is represented by these manufacturers who are working on baseline measurements right now in 10,000 factories and working on long-term consumer-facing social and environmental standards that are much higher than the ones we have now. That kind of effort, I think, is really going to be critical for all of industry all around the world.
Terrific. And to close out from Cone's perspective, I would say mind the gap. If the gap is between the intention, the desired expectations you see on the slide on the screen, and then the other slide we shared earlier about the sense of our companies actually having an impact and are they delivering results, that the size of that gap is formidable, and I don't think consumers are going to live forever in that gap. And so the pressure to drive real outcomes and real impact and to actually show and to storytell and to engage people about your intentions and to make them clear to folks and to engage them on that journey is going to become increasingly critical, or it does create the risk for your company of people not thinking you're actually doing anything with all these terrific results that you're actually driving within you. So thank you so much for the panelists, really terrific set of experiences, and appreciate the questions from the audience. Thank you so much.